Content warning. This episode contains discussion of crimes against children, including possession of child sexual abuse materials.
So there were a couple of filings in Kegan Kline's case today, which frankly are a little bit confusing and very interesting. So we thought we would take a few minutes to talk about them with you and see if we can come up with some ideas about what they might mean.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, the Murdersheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murdersheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murdersheet, and this is...
The Delphi murders, Kegan Kline's proposed change of plea hearing. All right, today is Monday, March 20th, 2023, and there's been a new update in the case against Kegan Kline. Just to clarify, Kegan Kline is the 28-year-old man who is currently facing charges surrounding child sexual abuse materials. Reporting from the Murdersheet back in 2022 linked him with the Delphi case. We basically published transcripts indicating that in 2020, police and authorities interrogated Kegan Kline and accused him of having contact with Liberty German, who was murdered along with her friend Abigail Williams in 2017, and basically accused him of catfishing Libby. And so that's his tie to the Delphi case. And he's never been charged in the Delphi case, but at the same time, it seems like there is that link there. We've reported on it. Others have reported on it. And at this point, he's facing 25 counts, mostly regarding child sexual abuse materials that were found on his devices. But recently, today that is, there's been a weird update in the case that we frankly don't really know what to make of.
So maybe the best way to do this is simply to read from these motions. To be clear, I'm not going to read every word of these motions because there's a lot of repetition and there's a lot of long strings of dates of specific events that I don't think are specifically relevant to what we want to discuss here.
All you need to know is that Kegan Kline, as of yesterday, his next pretrial hearing was supposed to be on March 30th, and his trial was tentatively scheduled for May 2023.
Right. Motion to lift pretrial conference and jury trial and schedule for a change of plea hearing. Comes now the defendant Kegan Kline by counsel Andrew Achey and respectfully requests the court lift the pretrial conference scheduled for March 30th, 2023 and schedule this matter for a change of plea hearing. In support of said motion, defense states that the parties have negotiated a proposed resolution to this cause of action. Typically, of course, this means that the defense attorneys and the prosecutors have made what's known as a plea bargain. A plea bargain is an instance where, to save the bother and expense and uncertainty of a trial, the parties will agree on like lesser charges. In other words, maybe we're dropped these charges if you plead to these charges, if you plead guilty to these charges. So basically, it would indicate that Kegan Kline in this matter, who's been pleading not guilty, is going to admit responsibility for at least something, and that in return for this, the matter no longer needs to be tried. And it says pretty explicitly that the parties have negotiated a proposed resolution in this cause of action.
But not so fast.
Yes.
Because the prosecution also needs to weigh in on this, right? It takes two to tango and to make a plea agreement.
Why don't you read the prosecution's response?
Yes. And just to know, both of these filings were filed back-to-back today. So
about an hour and a half apart, I believe.
Yeah, hour and a half apart. So this was pretty quick. Response to defendant's motion to lift pretrial conference and jury trial and schedule for a change of plea hearing. Comes now the state of Indiana by Courtney B. Alwine, deputy prosecuting attorney, and respectfully notifies the court that the parties have not negotiated a proposed resolution in this cause of action. Any plea of guilty would be without a plea agreement from the state, and the sentence would be determined entirely at this court's discretion. Further, the state does not object to setting this matter for a change of plea hearing. However, the state would respectfully request the court convert the March 30th, 2023 hearing already scheduled, rather than continue this matter any further. The state would additionally request the court not vacate the jury trial until any plea of guilty is entered. Okay, so that's very interesting. You have Achey, representing Kegan Kline, saying,
We have a deal.
We have a deal. We don't need, we're going to change our plea. And to be clear, Kegan Kline has previously pled not guilty, and a change in plea would indicate that he's likely thinking about pleading guilty.
Pleading guilty for at least some of the charges.
Yes. And then Courtney Alwine, representing the Miami County Prosecutor's Office, is coming and saying, we don't have a deal.
Of course, Achey and Ms. Alwine are both officers of the court and are therefore obliged in their court filings to be truthful and not make false assertions. So it's interesting that the assertions they are making in this case appear to directly contradict each other. In other words, one says, we have a deal, and the other one says, no, we don't have a deal.
Now, one interesting wrinkle to all of this that also draws from our previous reporting on the murder sheet is we previously reported, and we'll certainly include a link to this episode in our show notes, that in July of 2022, Superintendent of the Indiana State Police, Doug Carter, flew in a helicopter up to Miami County, up to Peru, Indiana, where this trial or this case is taking place, and he met with prosecutors from the Miami County office. And our understanding from our reporting is that meeting included his exhortation that Miami County prosecutors not make a deal with Kegan Kline, that they take it to trial. So that is interesting. That's a factor in this, I imagine.
That's a factor in this, and we know that's certainly what Doug Carter's belief and priority was at that time. I think it's worth noting and pointing out the obvious fact that meeting happened months before the arrest of Richard Allen. So it's possible that Doug Carter's priorities changed.
Absolutely. For all we know, I mean, this is an investigation that, despite the best efforts of us and other reporters, there can be quite a black box around certain pieces of information, and we're not necessarily privy to all those conversations. So very well, maybe this is no longer any sort of priority. But when you have discrepancies between a defense attorney and a prosecutor in this sense of we have a deal, no, we don't. And it seems interesting that one of Indiana's top law enforcement official, essentially on a state level, basically said, don't take a deal relatively recently. And I guess one question I would ask, and this is, we're speaking to this not based on any understanding we have about the situation, but is there a situation that you can imagine arising, Kevin, where a defense attorney thinks that there's a deal, but there isn't? Or like, part of the deal is that the prosecution can deny there being a deal?
Part of the problem here is, as I say, first of all, officers of the court have to be truthful in their court filings.
You can't just make it up.
And also, Andrew Achey is a veteran lawyer. He's well respected. I can't imagine him like making a mistake or misinterpreting something and thinking, oh, this is a deal. Oh,
Oops.
boy.
Yeah.
And when they're not being a deal. So that's hard to square with Courtney Allwine's pretty clear statement. There is no deal.
So this is not some attempt by the prosecution, in your view, to kind of cover up there being kind of a under the table deal. It's pretty blunt. I mean, the language is pretty clear, as you said. And here's another wrinkle to all of this, I feel. One thing about plea agreements, as far as we understand from researching different cases, from speaking with law enforcement officials on different cases, is that a plea deal is not a situation where if you lie to authorities, oh, there's nothing we can do, the plea still stands. It has to be.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is a plea deal once made is not necessarily written in stone.
Mm-hmm.
Again, prosecutors know what they're doing, and they will usually put something in the plea deal to the effect of, well, you have a deal, but only if you do X. And X might be you have a deal if you tell us the truth and testify in these other proceedings. And so if the prosecutors then determine that the person has not told the truth, that could potentially void the deal.
So for example, if I'm a criminal, let's say I'm charged with stealing a bunch of fancy new podcast microphones from Best Buy, and then I go to prosecutors and I say, well, let me tell you, Kevin's the real villain here. He's a podcast equipment thief of the first degree, and I will give you information that you can use to convict him if you give me a lighter sentence. And then I give them information and it doesn't go anywhere. I'm not owed a lighter sentence.
If they determine you lied.
Yes. And in
You've
fact,
broken your deal.
And that could make my situation even worse, potentially. So, because that makes them less likely to want to work with me in the future.
Yeah, plea bargains are often like any other deals. Like if you're buying a car and you say, okay, I'm going to give you $1,000 in return, you're going to give me your car, and you give me the car and I don't give you the money, then you can get the car back. The deal doesn't have to hold.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I guess when I bring that up not based on any information that we have about these particular set of circumstances. We're currently working on trying to figure out what is going on so we can get you more information. But at the same time, I do bring that up because you and I know from corresponding with Kegan Kline and also from reading the transcripts of his interviews and whatnot, he does have a history of, there being some issues with the truth, it seems. And I just wonder, could that be playing a factor here? But then I don't know why Achey would even file something like this because I imagine that like if something doesn't pan out or there's a lie told, then the defense attorney would be one of the first people. Oh, okay, well that didn't work out, basically.
And I think along those lines, it may be fair to note, and I think we're reporting this here for the first time, that at one point in the process, this long process of the prosecution of Kegan Kline, there was a deal that was at least on the table. And that deal was ultimately voided because it was determined that Kegan Kline did not hold up his end of it. In short, he lied. So
when you have somebody who has a history of doing that and then a history of deceptive behavior otherwise, it's just highly unusual that we're seeing these two filings back to back that are so contradictory. One thing playing out in the background of all of this that we have not reported before that I do want to note is that, we've texted back and forth with Kegan Kline in the past through, a service through the Miami County Jail. And mostly it seems like he's after money, and you don't want to put money on his books so he can text you because he could very well use that for whatever. So One interesting thing, though, there were a couple of text attempts in January. And basically how we know he's trying to text us is we get a text saying, Kegan Kline would like to text you from Miami County Jail, Indiana. The service is provided by CPC.
We have to get one of those texts on Saturday.
Yes, but not only Saturday, Wednesday, March 1st, Wednesday, March 8th, Friday, March 10th, this Friday, and this past Saturday. It's just odd. I mean, he seems to be very much desperate to get in touch. And again, we're not putting money. He knows our mailing address. We're not putting money on his books because, he's a scammer. That's what he does. He wants to get money so he can do whatever. But, and if he wants to write us, he can easily write us. But the thing is, it is unusual. He's been trying to contact us a lot recently. I imagine maybe we're not the only ones he's trying to do that with. But I've been noticing that uptick and kind of wondering, is something going on?
Yes, and in fact, back in January, that was when the last time we received actual texts from him, other than Kegan Kline wants to text you. And at that time, he told us that he had a 10-page letter that he wanted to send us, and that the suggestion was that there was information in this 10-page letter we'd find very interesting. And
never received that letter.
Never received that letter.
Yeah, and we note that just to be like, if you're out there and for some reason you're corresponding with Kegan Kline, don't give him money. He just wants the money. He's not going to send you stuff. I mean, it's just, we very much offer him a kind of open invitation to come tell his side of the story on our show, whether it's through a letter or whatnot. But, this is a person who's been very duplicitous over time. And that's just been our experience. I mean, we're not saying that because of what he's charged with. We're saying that because of our personal interactions with him. And yeah, just to clarify why we're not putting money on his books. Because I'm sure some people are like, well, you should just pay him and then maybe he'll text you something that'll break everything wide open. That's not how he rolls. Now, yeah, this is all very odd to me, and I will be curious. I mean, what could Judge Spar do with this? I mean, if I were him, I'd be like, what?
Well, basically, if you read the filing by Prosecutor Courtney Allwine, she basically says, let's just keep the conference that's scheduled on March 30th, and we'll deal with all of this then.
So could this be a lot of the conferences, a lot of the pretrial conferences in this case have been a little bit interesting. It's interesting to get to see Kegan Kline on the monitor. It's interesting to hear the back and forth, but most of them have been pretty short. And, we're going to do this. No objections. We'll talk again in a few weeks. Could this mean that this hearing will be a little bit more interesting if there's this back and forth about, do we have a plea deal?
Yeah, I think it's going to potentially be more interesting. And I also think there's an excellent chance there's going to be more filings between now and then to try to straighten this out.
There very well might be. And maybe it'll get solved by the time the hearing rolls around. I don't know.
And I'll be honest, as we sit here talking, I keep on going back to the My Case page and hit refresh to see if there have been additional filings.
You live on My Case.
Yes.
You do. Hey everyone, it's Anya and Kevin.
We're both longtime true crime obsessives. That's why the Murder Sheet emphasizes research, interviews, and digging for the truth. We've led the national media on major crime stories, providing scoops and exclusives to our audience. We've run interviews with some fascinating figures, and have more planned ahead. We're proud of the work we do here, and we are so thankful to all of our listeners for making it possible.
If you really enjoy this show and are looking for an opportunity to get even more content, consider joining our Patreon. For $5, you basically get 2 extra episodes a month. What's more, these aren't just any episodes. They're 2 very cool live episodes. You can join in and watch live, weigh in with questions or comments, the works. Those episodes tend to be much looser in terms of our style and format. We'll go behind the scenes on our journalistic process, tell anecdotes about some of the wild things we've seen while reporting, give you our opinions, and try to answer all of the questions you've always wanted to ask us about the cases you care about.
By joining, you'd also be helping directly support us. Podcasting is a tough business for independent voices. The Murder Sheet does not belong to a network, and we're not owned by a mega corporation. So we really appreciate our Patreons for helping to support us.
If you're interested, just go to patreon.com/murdersheet. And subscribe at the $5 level. Again, that's patreon.com/murdersheet. But hopefully by giving the information that we do know and reporting that for the first time here and kind of giving a sense of some of this background, we can at least fill things in, because a lot of people are understandably very confused about where does the Kegan Kline lead stand as it pertains to the Delphi case. And that remains unclear. But I will say one thing that you can be absolutely sure of is I believe if there was evidence, direct evidence that people felt, that authorities behind the scenes felt was strong enough to make a case against him pertaining to the Delphi case, I think charges would be brought against him.
Yes.
And I think the fact that if we just had the defense attorney with his statement or with his filing today, there would be a lot of speculation out there about, oh my gosh, did he file, is he going to basically say what happened, or, is this a Delphi related plea? But I mean, I think what Miss Alwine is kind of filing back indicates that whatever this is, it's a lot more murky than any clear-cut deal. A lot of people have repeated the assertion that somehow Kegan Kline's activity over the summer, which included getting taken into Indiana State Police custody, a river search near his former residence in Peru, Indiana, that he may have somehow given information that led to Richard Allen. Our understanding is that that is absolutely false. And that, it's just simply not true, and a lot of the timing is merely coincidental. That's our understanding for now. That's what we're hearing behind the scenes. And that continues to be what we're hearing, that there's not been some sort of established situation where he's providing information that leads to Allen's arrest or leads to anything with Allen. So I just want to note that up front, because every time Kline comes up, I think there is a understandable tendency to want to draw that link of like, well, there must be a connection, and that's not what we're hearing at this point.
And as long as we're in the realm of pure speculation, and this again is pure speculation, I think it might be worthwhile to go back and note what the last official filing in this case was. And of course, that filing a couple of weeks ago, I believe, was a list of the witnesses that were planned to be called by the prosecution in the case against Kegan Kline. And this list included the name of Kegan Kline's father. It included the name of a female who had been romantically linked to Kegan Kline. It included the name of a friend of Kegan Kline. And for some people, when they see something like that on a piece of paper and realize that people they care about are getting drawn into court, and that some of these people may know some pretty intimate and personal things about them, that can be an incentive, at least in some cases, to go for a plea bargain. In other words, I don't want my dad telling what he knows. I don't want my girlfriend telling what she knows, because it just embarrass and humiliate me. Maybe there's a way to avoid this.
Mm-hmm. And
that's not saying that's what happened here. Again, that's pure speculation.
That filing occurred on March 7th, 2023, so it would be about like 13 days ago. Plenty of time to stew on that whole situation. I was also struck by, in the witness list, there was, in addition to personal connections of Kegan Kline, including his father, Jerry Anthony Kline, or Tony Kline, there was also a huge bevy of law enforcement officials. I mean, that's got to be kind of intimidating, I imagine, where you have suddenly, like, these are different officials from, like, a range of different agencies, including the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, Miami County Sheriff's Office, Indiana State Police, experts in a range of fields regarding child sexual exploitation. So it's just a situation where I think for a case that is stretched on this long, and I'm going to zoom back all the way to the end, or rather, I should say, the beginning of this My Case page. And what it says now is that the case was filed August 19th, 2020. And we are here in March of 2023.
So 2.5 years.
I mean, this has been going on for a while. And we all know that the justice system can be slow, that sometimes pretrial hearings and the like stretch on for years. I'm not necessarily saying that's unique to this case or truly bizarre, but I am saying it has been a long time. That's a long time to be incarcerated. So I guess I'm just throwing that out there, that for someone who's been waiting so long, seeing that witness list, certainly might have provoked some sort of reaction, or something else entirely might be happening here. I mean, how would you envision Achey responding to Alwine's filing? I mean, I thought we had something. I mean,
I don't mean to be evasive, but it's impossible to know because we don't know what the underlying facts are.
Right. Frankly, given how this case is going, it seems unlikely that we will know anytime soon what the underlying facts are and why this is happening. I'll note that, again, Kegan has never been charged with anything regarding Delphi, but the charges he's facing are deeply serious and disturbing. These 25 counts. I think one thing with the Kegan Kline case that has happened, too, since it's been linked to Delphi, is that a lot of people, understandably, again, seek to use it almost as a gauge of how things are going, or, they want to read the tea leaves from that to understand, what does this mean for the Delphi murder case? What's happening? And I think that's very understandable. We, to a certain extent, wish to do that too, and think about, well, what could this mean? But until we or other journalists or whoever get concrete information from reliable sources, multiple sources, I think it's safe to say that it's probably best to keep speculation very much labeled speculation and not try to draw too many conclusions, because this is such a weird and twisty situation that there could be any number of things going on here that we can't know because we can't sneak into these people's offices and spy on them, right? All we can do is try to piece together information afterwards, interpret information afterwards. And I just feel like in this case, in the Delphi case, and frankly, in most cases, there's so much weird stuff going on behind the scenes that you never know about, or you only find out about much later and then clarifies everything, that it's probably not super helpful to try to draw any really concrete conclusions at this time until people have more information. So what we're trying to do by sharing some of our reporting with you in this situation is maybe add some clarity or add some discussion of what possibilities could be occurring here, but it's not to determine, this is what's happening. Here's how, we solidly know everything. It's just too murky at this point, and hopefully we can get some more information going forward. We're going to be certainly trying to run down some of that information this week and in the lead up to this hearing. We'll be very curious to see if the hearing does occur as previously planned. We'll be curious to see what future filings come out of this, and if there's anything big in said filings, we will certainly try to update you on the podcast when it's appropriate. But in the meantime, I guess we'll all just be kind of clicking refresh on Kegan Kline's My Case portal and seeing if anything new comes up. Well, we'd pretty much just wrapped up recording that portion of the episode when further developments happened in Kegan Kline's case.
The court in the case, which of course is Judge Timothy Sparr, issued an order.
Order. Comes now the defendant Kegan A. Kline by counsel Andrew Achey and files the defendant's motion to lift pretrial conference and jury trial and schedule for a change of plea hearing on March 20th, 2023. Comes now also the state of Indiana by Courtney B. Alwine, deputy prosecuting attorney, and files on the same date the state's response to the defendant's motion to lift pretrial conference and jury trial and schedule for a change of plea hearing. And now the court, being duly advised in the premises, orders as follows. 1. The pretrial hearing that heretofore has been scheduled to take place on Thursday, March 30th, 2023 at 10 a.m., hereby is converted to a change of plea hearing. Said hearing shall take place on an in-person basis. 2. The court declines to lift the jury trial at this point. However, the court will entertain a renewed request for the same at the conclusion of the change of plea hearing if circumstances then warrant the making of such a request. So ordered this 20th day of March, 2023. Timothy P. Spar, Judge, Miami Circuit Court.
So basically, the pretrial hearing that we all expected to happen on March 30th, there actually is going to be a hearing on March 30th, and it's going to cover this potential change of plea. And it sounds like it's at that hearing we're going to hopefully get more information about what all of this means and whether or not there actually is a deal and whether or not there's even going to be a trial or if this is going to plead out. Judge Spar is not canceling the jury trial at this time, so I don't think he wants to count his eggs until they're hatched, and he's not going to do that until there's actually a plea of guilty that's been made and accepted.
And, I mean, just for folks who might not be so familiar with the law, Kevin, if it so happens that Kegan Kline pleads guilty, that's it. He can't go back and say, actually, just kidding.
The legal system is very, very complicated. And people, certainly some people try to get out of pleas or say the information I was given wasn't accurate or this or that, or maybe I pled guilty, but I was actually innocent. There's always the possibility for more appeals, and there's always the possibility for prisoners to abuse the legal process.
I wonder also how Achey is going into this. Is he going into this thinking, well, if there's no deal, then there's no guilty plea? Or is he going into this thinking like, well, we shot our shot and, this is what my client wants?
Achey said in his filing that there was a deal.
Right.
So that means that, in my mind, Achey is an officer of the court. He's an honorable person. He's an experienced person. So it means to me that when he filed that, he believed there was a deal.
So I wonder if the prosecution's response to that would just make this whole thing moot, essentially. If there's no deal, then, as far as if Achey was going into it thinking, okay, we've arranged a deal and that's not happening, then I wonder if it's actually going to even go down on March 30th. The way that he anticipated.
Well, at the very least, there'll be a hearing, and hopefully it will answer some of these questions, because I think everybody is just as confused as we are.
And, it almost sounds like just from some of his language, Judge Spar is not necessarily confused, but he's certainly, leaving room for there actually being a jury trial after all, after everyone kind of discusses their position. Maybe a plea does not.
Yes, it's unclear what exactly is going to happen. If Judge Spar was convinced that a plea was going to take place that day and that's all that was going to happen, he certainly would have lifted the jury trial, and he didn't do that.
Obviously, if you believe Achey was thinking there's a plea deal here, I can buy that. But I will be very curious. What would it indicate to you if Kegan ends up making a guilty plea, even if everyone makes it clear there actually is no deal on the table? What would that indicate to you?
I can't imagine Kegan making a guilty plea unless there is some sort of deal, because why would he do that?
He doesn't want to suffer through a trial now that he knows who's on the witness list?
Well, maybe that's reason to really press your attorney to get some sort of a deal. But I can't imagine he would make a deal. I can't imagine he'd plead guilty unless there was some sort of deal.
And frankly, given what we know, given what we've previously reported, and given the facts of this case, I have a hard time believing that the Miami County Prosecutor's Office would also make a deal. They would certainly be saving time and potentially the money that it takes to run a trial like this. But at the same time, we know from our past reporting that there may be reasons that they wouldn't want to make a deal.
Yeah, that's very true.
And they have a strong case against him, judging from the probable cause affidavit. So, yeah, it's one of those things where we kind of have a sense of all the different players involved, but it almost makes this whole thing more baffling because you're like, what are we doing? So, if there ends up being a pretrial hearing or plea hearing on March 30th, you and I will certainly be there.
And we will certainly let you all know what happens and what we observe.
But just know we're pretty confused too. So if there's stuff that happens in the interim, we'll try to get back to you, try to keep you updated, and figure this whole thing out together.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.